From Olympic stages watched by millions to live broadcasts that turned from celebration to horror in an instant, winter sports have witnessed tragedies that stunned the world. These weren't just accidents. They were moments that reshaped safety rules, ended careers, and left audiences in silence. Today, we're diving into the 5 worst winter sports deaths in TV history, the chilling stories behind the moments that shocked the world. Snowboarding has always lived on the edge. Speed against gravity, athlete against mountain, skill against nature. But on January 13, 2026, that balance shattered in the Swiss Alps, and the sport lost one of its pioneers. Kenholdz wasn't just another rider carving through fresh powder. He was history. A man who stood on the Olympic podium when snowboarding made its debut at the 1998 Winter Games in Nagano, 1998 Winter Olympics, claiming bronze in giant slalom and helping introduce the world to a new era of competition. He went on to compete in multiple Olympic Games, captured 2 gold medals at the Winter X Games in snowboard cross, and built a reputation as one of Switzerland's most fearless athletes. After stepping away from the World Cup circuit following the Turin 2006 Winter Olympics, he didn't slow down. He pushed further into the extremes, becoming a pioneer of speed riding and freeride snowboarding. He was 50 years old in January 2026, experienced, calculated, a man who knew the mountains better than most people know their own neighborhoods. That's what makes what happened next so haunting. Kenholdz was riding in the Lötschental Valley in Switzerland's Valais Canton, high on the eastern slope of Hochschries, at around 2,400 meters above sea level. The air was thin. The snow looked pristine. He was with a friend, just another day chasing freedom in the Alps. Then, without warning, the mountain moved. An avalanche broke loose. In seconds, tons of snow roared down the slope. There was no time to outrun it, no time to fight it. The same terrain that had given him a lifetime of triumph suddenly became a crushing, unstoppable force. He was buried beneath the snow. His friend, who had been skiing alongside him, managed to save himself and immediately tried to help. Rescue teams were called. Helicopters cut through the cold alpine air. Kenholdz was pulled from beneath the avalanche and airlifted first to Visp, then to a hospital in Zion. For a moment, there was hope, but the injuries were too severe. On January 11, 2026, Kenholdz was pronounced dead at Spital Sion. He was 50 years old. The news sent shockwaves through the snowboarding world. This wasn't just an athlete. This was one of the first Olympic medalists in the sport's history. The man who had stood on the podium in Nagano when snowboarding fought for legitimacy. The rider who had racked up 14 World Cup victories. The 2-time X Games champion. The adventurer who later soared off peaks, paraglided onto frozen lakes near St. Moritz, and even completed the first speed-riding descent of the Matterhorn, a feat few would dare attempt. And maybe that's what makes this loss hit even harder. Kenholdz built a life around chasing nature's most powerful elements. He embraced the risk. He respected it. In one of his recent social media posts, he wrote about being ready to drop everything and go when nature's wonders align. That was who he was, always ready for the next horizon. But mountains don't care about medals. They don't remember podium finishes or Olympic history. They don't pause for legends. Avalanches remain one of the most unpredictable and deadly dangers in freeride snowboarding. Even for experts, even for pioneers, even for someone who had spent decades mastering the terrain. The Swiss Ski Federation expressed devastation. Teammates, fans, and fellow riders shared tributes, remembering not only his achievements but his spirit, adventurous, fearless, endlessly curious. He wasn't just competing against other athletes. He was constantly exploring what was possible when human courage met raw alpine power. And now, the same snow that once carried him to Olympic glory became the final chapter of his story. For those who grew up watching snowboarding explode onto the global stage in 1998, Kenholdz represented the beginning. For younger riders, he was proof that life after competition could still be extraordinary. For the freeride community, he was one of its architects. His death is a stark reminder of something winter sports fans often forget while watching breathtaking runs on television. Behind every smooth descent is a mountain that can turn deadly without warning. The beauty of winter sports is inseparable from the danger. That's what draws athletes to it. That's what draws us to watch. And sometimes, heartbreakingly, that danger wins.
At the 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, tragedy struck when 19-year-old Australian skier Ross Milne, despite his experience, encountered a fatal accident.
High above Innsbruck, the slopes of Pacherkofel were meant to showcase the world's finest skiers during the 1964 Winter Olympics. But before the downhill races even began, there was tension in the mountain air. That winter had delivered unusually little snow. Organizers were forced to haul in massive amounts from other areas, even calling in soldiers to help build up the course. What should have been pristine Olympic terrain felt unstable, artificial, and rushed. Among the young athletes preparing to race was 19-year-old Ross Milne. He came from Myrtleford, a small Australian town far removed from Europe's towering alpine traditions. But Ross wasn't just filling a lane on the start list. Back home, he was widely regarded as Australia's most promising downhill skier, naturally gifted, versatile, and driven. He excelled at water skiing, horse riding, and tennis. Friends described him as upbeat and composed, fearless, but never careless. He had already spent time competing in Europe, determined to prove that an Australian could stand shoulder to shoulder with the world's best. The Olympics weren't just a dream. They were his statement, a chance to put his country on the winter sports map. On the morning of January 25, 1964, Ross prepared for an official training run. The atmosphere on the course was chaotic. Nearly 100 skiers were allowed on the track at once. There was little spacing, little control, and almost no margin for error on a downhill course lined with unforgiving trees and exposed rocks. Just before 11:30 a.m., Ross pushed off. He accelerated quickly, carving through the icy surface as wind tore past his helmet. The upper section came and went in seconds. Then he approached one of the steepest and most dangerous stretches of the course, a blind rise where visibility vanished until the final moment. As he crested it, he saw them. A cluster of skiers gathered ahead, standing directly in his path. At speeds between 60 and 70 kilometers per hour, hesitation wasn't an option. He reacted instinctively, attempting to brake and steer around them. But downhill skis aren't built for sudden stops. The icy surface offered no forgiveness. His edge caught. In an instant, control was gone. Ross veered off the course and slammed violently into a tree. Further down the slope, teammates initially had no idea what had occurred. It was only when one skier climbed back up and saw him lying motionless that the magnitude of the accident became clear. He was unconscious, gravely injured. Medics rushed to his side. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation began immediately as he was carried down from the mountain. A helicopter transported him to hospital, but the injuries were catastrophic. Shortly after arrival, Ross Milne was pronounced dead. Shock rippled through the Olympic Village. Just days earlier, another athlete had died during training. Now, before the games had even properly begun, a second fatality cast a dark shadow over what was supposed to be a global celebration of sport. For Australia's small Olympic team, the grief was overwhelming. Teammates and officials gathered that afternoon for a memorial service, many reportedly in tears, struggling to comprehend how the confident young skier who had stood beside them hours earlier was suddenly gone. Back in Australia, the tragedy struck in a different way. Ross's younger brother Malcolm had arrived in Melbourne with their parents, preparing to fly to Europe to watch him compete. Instead, a knock at their hotel room door brought devastating news. The journey was canceled. The family returned home in silence. In the official aftermath, investigators concluded that Ross had caught an edge and lost control. Some officials suggested that competitors from nations without deep alpine traditions lacked the experience for such demanding courses. But those closest to him rejected that narrative. Teammates and team managers pointed to the overcrowded training run, the poor course management, and the dangerously exposed trees lining the slope. Many believed the conditions, not inexperience, played a decisive role. What was meant to be a triumphant Olympic debut became one of the game's darkest chapters, a tragedy that still lingers as a reminder of how quickly speed, pressure and imperfect preparation can turn deadly on a mountainside.
Kazimierz K. Skrzypecki, a Polish-born luger competing for Great Britain, was making a training run on a brand-new Olympic course that looked more like a concrete waterslide with straw bales than a purpose-built venue.
In January 1964, the mountains overlooking Innsbruck were buzzing with Olympic excitement. The 1964 Winter Olympics were about to begin, and for the first time ever, luge would appear on the Olympic program. Athletes from around the world gathered at the icy track in Igls, eager to be part of history. Among them stood an unlikely competitor, 58-year-old Kazimierz K. Skrzypecki. He was not a young winter prodigy raised on alpine slopes. His journey to the Olympics had been anything but conventional. Born in Eastern Europe, trained as an architect, and shaped by the turmoil of World War II, he had served as a Royal Air Force officer with Polish squadrons in Britain. By the early 1960s, he had taken up luge, a fast, dangerous sport that was still finding its place internationally. Against the odds, he earned selection to represent Great Britain at the Games. It was an extraordinary achievement. Luge was making its Olympic debut, and the British program itself was still developing. Yet, K. Skrzypecki stood at the start line on equal terms with competitors decades younger. Age had not dimmed his ambition. He carried himself with quiet determination, driven by the same Olympic dream that fuels every athlete. On January 21st, just days before the opening ceremony, he took to the Igls track for a training run. The course was brutally fast, a narrow, twisting channel of ice bordered by rigid walls and unforgiving curves. There were no roaring crowds that day, no medals to be won, only the sharp scrape of steel runners on ice and the intense focus of athletes testing their limits. Somewhere along the descent, disaster struck. The exact sequence of events was never fully clarified, but at high speed he lost control. His sled smashed violently into the side of the chute. The force of the impact was catastrophic. He suffered a fractured skull, a broken pelvis, and multiple severe injuries. Rescue teams responded immediately, rushing him to a hospital in Innsbruck. Surgeons worked through the night in a desperate attempt to save him, but the injuries were overwhelming. The following day, during emergency surgery, his heart failed. A man who had survived the chaos of war and rebuilt his life across borders had lost his life on an Olympic training track. The news stunned the Olympic community. Luge was meant to be celebrating its historic debut at the Games. Instead, before competition had even officially begun, it had already been marked by tragedy. For the British team, the loss cut deeply. They had not only lost a teammate, they had lost a symbol of perseverance, a man who proved that determination does not fade with age. His wife and brother traveled to Austria to bring him home. At their request, his body was returned to Poland, where he was laid to rest, a final journey that reflected the many chapters of his remarkable life. Only days later, another fatal accident would occur on the Olympic slopes, deepening the sorrow surrounding those games. When the opening ceremony finally took place on January 29th, celebration was overshadowed by grief. A minute of silence honored the men who had lost their lives, a solemn reminder that behind the grandeur of the Olympics stand real people, real risks, and sometimes irreversible consequences.
Over.
Yeah, I'm ready, in position.
Drop it in 5.
Snowboarding is a sport built on speed, precision, and daring, but even the most skilled athletes are never immune to its dangers. On the morning of March 12, 2006, the adrenaline-fueled thrill of the sport turned deadly for 26-year-old Jonathan Johansson, a rising star from Sweden who had recently competed at the Winter Olympics in Turin. Johansson had been training on Whiteface Mountain in Lake Placid, New York, preparing for an International Ski Federation World Cup snowboard cross event. The course, known as the Boreen Trail, was designed with jumps and obstacles to test the limits of even the most experienced riders. Johansson, who had been competing at the World Cup level since 2000 and was ranked 45th in the world, approached one of the jumps alone, his focus sharp, his body ready for the split-second precision that the sport demanded. But in an instant, everything went wrong. He launched into the air, his trajectory perfect for a fraction of a second. But then, mid-flight, he lost balance. His body twisted, his landing miscalculated. He slammed onto the icy surface with catastrophic force. The impact shattered his femur and ribs, tore his aorta, punctured his lung and heart. Rescue teams arrived immediately, rushing him to Adirondack Medical Center. Surgeons fought to save him, but the injuries were insurmountable. Within hours, the young athlete who had chased Olympic glory his entire life was pronounced dead. Officials confirmed that Johansson had remained within the course boundaries, wearing a helmet, and had struck no external obstacles like trees or poles. It was a tragic reminder that in snowboard cross, the danger isn't just in obstacles, it's in the physics of the sport itself. The speed, the jumps, the razor-thin margins for error. The news sent shockwaves through the snowboarding community. Johansson had just returned from Turin, where he finished 12th in snowboard cross and was considered one of Sweden's most promising snowboarders. The World Cup event at Whiteface was immediately cancelled in his honor. Teammates, competitors, and fans struggled to process the sudden loss of a man whose life revolved around chasing the thrill of the mountains. For those who watched him ride, Johansson embodied the essence of snowboarding. Fearless, ambitious, and constantly pushing the limits. But that same daring spirit, so central to his life and career, made the fall all the more tragic. In the end, it was a reminder that in winter sports, glory and danger often exist on the same slope, and sometimes the mountain demands the ultimate price.
All'alba la giovane sciatrice, appena 19enne, non ce l'ha fatta. La rovinosa caduta ieri durante un allenamento non ha dato scampo neanche a lei.
The mountains of South Tyrol had long been a playground for young athletes chasing speed, precision, and glory. But on October 28, 2024, the frozen slopes of the Schnauztaler Glacier became the site of a tragedy that shook the winter sports world. 19-year-old Matilda Lorenzi, a rising star in alpine skiing, was taking a routine high-speed training run down the Grauend G1 slope when the unthinkable happened. Matilda had grown up with skis on her feet, racing alongside her older sister Lucrezia, herself a World Cup competitor. The sisters had honed their skills at Sestriere, moving there with their family to chase their dreams. By 2024, Matilda had already claimed national titles in both the elite and junior categories, secured top 10 finishes at the Junior World Championships, and proved herself on the Europa Cup circuit. She was widely regarded as one of Italy's brightest young talents, a skier whose future seemed limitless. That morning, she launched into the icy run with the focus and determination that had brought her this far. But in the blink of an eye, control was lost. Her skis slipped. Her trajectory went wrong. She was thrown violently from the slope, slamming into the unforgiving ice. Rescue teams raced to her side, airlifting her to the hospital in Bolzano. Surgeons fought desperately, but the injuries were too severe. By the night, Matilda Lorenzi had passed away. News of her death rippled through the skiing community like a shockwave. Fellow athletes, coaches, and fans mourned the loss of someone so young, so talented, and so full of promise. Tributes poured in from around the world, including from Michaela Schifrin, who honored Matilda with heartfelt messages across social media. Italian authorities launched an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the crash, probing potential safety lapses. But for those who loved her, no inquiry could undo the grief. Her older sister Lucrezia spoke of Matilda with a mixture of sorrow and admiration, calling her a good giant whose determination and drive would continue to inspire even in her absence. The Italian Winter Sports Federation, the International Ski and Snowboard Federation, and the Italian Ministry of Defense all issued statements expressing profound condolences for the loss of an athlete whose life and career had been cut tragically short. Matilda Lorenzi's story was one of talent, ambition, and promise, a life spent racing against the clock and the mountains themselves. But on that fateful day, the mountains exacted their toll. A stark reminder that in alpine skiing, the line between triumph and tragedy is as thin and sharp as the ice beneath a skier's blades. Her funeral in Giaveno and burial in Valjoie marked the end of a young life, but her legacy, the courage, Skill and passion she brought to the slopes will endure, a haunting echo across the snowy peaks she loved so dearly.